Doctors and nurses. Have you ever witnessed a couple have a child that was obviously not the father's? If so, what happened? Not a doctor or nurse, but my ex-girlfriend delivered a baby while I was in the delivery room, and turns out it wasn't mine. She was 16. I was 15. All along, I was under the impression that this kid was mine and time to be an adult. Took all the classes, read the books, worked every night and weekend to save whatever money I could as a 15-year-old. I finally got the call that she's in labor, so I have somebody rush me to the ER. Luckily for her, it wasn't a long labor, only about 6 hours. But there was a complication. Doctor assured us it was going to be okay, but the nurses were prepping for things to go south. Baby comes out. It's a light shade of purple, and the nurses immediately take the baby and put on the smallest mask you've ever seen to help it get oxygen, I guess. I was too panicked to ask a lot of questions. They state they need to keep the baby on watch overnight, so I stay in the room with the ex. The next evening, baby is back in the room with us, and all seems well. The ex is asleep, and the same nurse from the night before comes into the room and beckons me out. She states that at risk of her losing her job, she has to break some harsh news to me. That kid is not mine. She stated that while at this stage it wasn't obvious, over the next few weeks it would become clear this kid was mixed, and since both of us were white, it was a high probability that it wasn't mine. Cue a mixed bag of emotions and me promptly waking the ex to get a little clarification. Come to find out she knew the chances and was hoping it was mine because it worked better for her. Apparently, her father was an old-school racist and she didn't want to have to deal with that. I left the hospital to collect my thoughts, and a few weeks later was served with child support papers. One DNA test, and about 6 weeks later, I'm 0.0% that kid's father. Wherever that nurse is now, I hope your life is amazing. I understand that you were not supposed to get involved in the personal side of things and keep it professional, but you saved me a lot of additional headaches. Sometimes doing the human thing to do is better than the professional thing to do. Story 2. Similar, but I don't know where else to put it because it just makes me laugh. My aunt is a nurse in the maternity ward. She had a couple come in where they were both very black. Lady has baby and it is white as heck, like totally pale, no trace of any pigment. They put the baby on her mom, and the mom starts yelling about how this isn't her baby and they stole her baby. In all fairness, you can be very confused during and after delivery. It wasn't stupidity. Just sobbing and freaking out, and the father is just sitting there and looks very confused because even he's realizing that even if she did cheat, there's no way the baby would be that white. The doctor and nurses are trying to assure her that this is her baby and the skin usually darkens later. Come to find out when he called his mom, she pointed out that they have a second cousin who's albino and maybe baby got that gene. Turns out that's what happened. Baby was albino. Can't you tell, though, that a baby is albino? Story 3. I know a girl who was pregnant with her boyfriend's best friend's baby. I found out there was a possibility about a week before she gave birth. I went up to see her once he was born, and he looked just like the friend. There was no question. I broke the news to her boyfriend, and he was absolutely devastated. His parents were heartbroken and super angry. They'd bought the girl everything she needed, including a $500 car seat or stroller set. She refused to give anything back. She started up a relationship with a friend immediately after having their child, and they're still together a decade later. But the kicker for me has always been that the boyfriend and best friend were next-door neighbors. She moved into his house after coming home from the hospital, so her ex-boyfriend and his family had to see them basically every day, raising this child that they had believed to be his for the entire pregnancy. I can't even imagine. And they had the audacity to stay there. Wow. Story 4. My fiancé's father is almost certainly not his biological dad. His mom was just a genuinely terrible human being who didn't even try to hide the fact she was cheating. But his dad loved him from the second he was born, and when the mom decided 4 years later she just didn't want the kid anymore, she just gave him to his dad and rode off. Jay's dad ended up getting married, and they tried for kids before finding out his count was too low to ever father children. They ended up adopting many years later. He sat my fiancé down when my fiancé was 13 and told him the truth, and that if Jay wanted to test, Jay would, but it was up to him. Jay cried and told him he just wanted him to be his dad, and that was the end of that. Enough to make a grown man cry. Jeez. Story 5. I worked as a lab tech before I became a nurse. We had a set of twins in the NICU that were super early, and the mom was still in the OR from the cesarean. I was drawing baby B samples when mom was wheeled over to baby A's isolate. She was crying and said, "Oh, thank God you're not black. I've been so worried for the last 7 months." So newborn babies, especially when they're born early, are very pink, almost red. So even if a baby was part black, their skin isn't necessarily dark yet. But looking at these babies, it was obvious they were going to be black. The shape of the face, the texture of the hair, and baby B that I was working on had an intense Mongolian spot. A few weeks later, my NICU nurse friend told me that the babies were now on a no info status, meaning security alert, can't give anyone information about them, can't refer to them by name, etc. She said there was a huge fight because the mom's husband, white guy, obviously noticed that the babies were half black and that mom had cheated on him and got pregnant. The real dad, black guy, came in and didn't realize the mom was even married. Those poor babies. Story 6. I had the opposite happen, sort of. My wife and I are both brown-skinned, dark-haired, half Mexicans, and our moms are both 100% white blondes with blue and green eyes. So we sort of knew it was a crapshoot with our baby, but the nurse who was assisting with delivery had no idea. At one point, she gets sort of nervous and calls for help, and another, I guess, more senior nurse came in and nodded and came over to talk to me. I thought there was something wrong with the baby as she came over and stumbled through some questions. So I was the father and no one else was coming, etc. Then finally, she awkwardly asks if either of us happened to be blonde growing up. I said, yeah, I was, and both the baby's grandparents are blonde as they come, and this wave of relief went over her, and she brought me over to see this blonde as heck crowning baby head. It's funny because he looks just like me if you applied a Instagram filter. We often get awkward questions about his heritage, and my wife always hits them with, yeah, we're not sure if he's mine. It's always funny to see people nod for a moment and then go, wait, what? Story 7. I had a college buddy whose fiancée was pregnant. They were the perfect couple. Both are just over a year with great careers starting out. Everything was butterflies and rainbows. Fast forward to the delivery room. They're in there, and out comes a very black baby. He's quite the pale redhead, and she's a blonde, blue-eyed Texas girl. He made sure everyone was okay, waited for her parents to arrive, and left without saying a word. He moved all his stuff out of the house while she was in the hospital and cut off all communications with her. Just walked out of their lives in the most stone-cold act I'd ever seen. They were together for 9 years, and he just left cold turkey. She tried to contact him at his job a few times, but he quickly moved up the ladder and eventually got a job in another city. He told me once that he took solace in the fact that her family had already dropped about $10,000 in a wedding that never happened. Can't say I blame the guy. Story 8. I used to work with a guy whose wife was pregnant. Near time for delivery, everyone at our place of business had a big party with gifts, money, etc. So big day comes. Water breaks, they get in the car to go to the hospital. She breaks the news on the way there. It's not his. The kid has another race, and if he could just drop her off at the hospital and then leave, that would be great. He took a few days off work, found a new apartment, moved out, filed divorce, etc. He called into work and told someone what happened. News spread pretty fast. All congratulations cards, etc. were cleaned up and thrown away. Everyone was very sensitive to his pain. Except somehow, I don't know how, I did not get the news. So on his first day back, I walked into the office he shared with 6 to 7 other guys and said, Hey, Daddy-o. How's fatherhood so far? Getting any sleep? Got some pictures? Let's see the little tyke. He slowly lifted his head to look at me with a painful look. The room was completely silent. One of his workmates stood up, grabbed my arm, and walked me out of the room, shushing me. What happened? I asked. Did it pass away? What's the problem? When he told me, I about passed myself. I still feel bad for the dude, and it's been 30 years. Story 9. Coworker of mine is a notorious compulsive liar, and we all know better than to believe a word that comes out of her mouth, but I hope like hell that this story is true because it's so freaking good. So this coworker, who's 19, is bisexual. Her wife is not, was her best friend from childhood. When they were both 18, the best friend proposed to her because she wanted the stability of a relationship. Coworker agreed, and they got married, but they both then decided that she couldn't live without intimacy, so they worked out an open marriage. The only caveat was that they had to tell each other who they were sleeping with and when, and they had to be smart about it all. Well, wife comes to coworker one day and tells her that they're going to have a baby. Coworker says that it is pretty much impossible since they both only have half of the baby-making equipment. Coworker has also not heard that the wife has been sleeping with anyone recently. Wife is then forced to admit that she's been having an unmentioned affair with coworker's twin brother. In that sense, he's the only man she's sleeping with. He's the father. Coworker calls her lawyer that day, and lawyer has divorce papers drawn up by 9 p.m. to serve the wife with the next day. I was about 70% on board with this story, because again, we're dealing with a known compulsive liar. Up until that detail. This all went down on a Sunday. I'll admit that I don't know much about lawyers, but I doubt that they're going to prioritize a 19-year-old's divorce papers over enjoying their weekend. The best part was that I went on break about 5 minutes after she did, and she was on a phone call, or pretended to be on one, with her lawyer for half her break. None of this was ever mentioned again. Yeah, she was definitely BSing you. Story 10. Happened to my fiancé's mom. His mom is a labor and delivery nurse. One time she had a patient whose parents were present during her stay at the hospital. It The staff there have a whiteboard with some general information about the patients. This information is nameless for HIPAA reasons and instead has a patient's number, so this patient had to be the only one in the wing at the time. Their father was walking back from the cafeteria at one point and noticed the board. He stopped one of the nurses and asked if the type of the patient on board was correct. He knew his daughter was the only patient there. It was B+. The nurse confirmed it was correct. Turns out he knew his and his wife's type. He was O positive and his wife was A negative. This combination will never yield a B positive baby. He brings his wife out and just points at the board, and this look of shock washes over her. That was a really good gotcha moment. Story 11. Not quite what you're asking, but in the same vein. I'm a nurse in a level 4 neonatal ICU. We service the sickest of the sick from our state and the surrounding states, so we see it all. We had a baby that was sick as snot. Lo and behold, we discovered its spinal fluid, etc., was septic with herpes. In most babies, we avoid this by treating the herpes while the mom is pregnant. In this case, the mom didn't even know she was a carrier. So where did it come from? This is the awkward and sickening moment when everyone in the room realized where the herpes came from. Turns out the father had an affair and contracted it from his lover. So yeah, while this woman's baby is on the verge of passing, she finds out her husband has been cheating on her, and his cheating bum is the reason their baby is sick. Story 12. My best friend was dating a girl and knocked her up. They got engaged and planned to get married right after the baby was born. There were about 10 of us in the waiting room, waiting for her to crank out the baby. It was essentially her parents. His were in another state, some of her friends and some of ours. After sitting there for about 2 hours, he walked out with a smirk on his face and says, "Let's go." We all thought something horrible had happened. Our friends asked how the baby is, and he said, "Fine, but black." Emotions for us to go, so we followed him. In the parking garage, he tells us to follow him to his apartment, then sends me a text asking I could put him up for a while. We literally moved him out of his apartment and into my spare bedroom in like an hour tops. Her parents didn't know who to be mad at. The confusion on their faces when he told them the baby was black was priceless. Story 13. I worked with this guy a few years back. He and his wife were pregnant. They were super excited and shared the news with everyone and put stuff all over social media. So fast forward a few months and the kid is unfortunately gone. They had a professional photographer come to the hospital and they did a series of photos, holding the baby, dressing it up, kissing it on the head, the usual newborn photos. The bizarre thing is they put them all on Facebook. I found it kind of morbid, but whatever, I've never lost a kid, so that's cool. One day at work, a guy from a different branch comes into the store and congratulates my coworker, slaps him on the back and says all this stereotypical new dad small talk BS. My coworker informs him the baby was gone. The other guy refuses to believe it and keeps saying, "Screw you, man, quit messing with me. I saw the pictures on Facebook." They go back and forth and the guy finally realizes he's not being messed with. This was the most uncomfortable exchange I've ever seen between two humans. I also don't know how to feel about this. Story 14. I'm a nurse working in labor and delivery. Most of the time, if the mom thinks the baby may not be her boyfriend or husband, they will just have their friend or sister or mom with them there for the delivery and have the dad come to the hospital or room after seeing the baby. No guarantees because babies can change a lot over a couple weeks. Many African American babies have very light skin when they're born and it gets darker. I had a patient's husband get upset about the baby being too light. They were both black, until his mom smacked him and told him that's what he looked like when he was born. Recently, I had something I thought was interesting happen. Girl comes into labor with her boyfriend, sister, and a friend. Boyfriend doesn't seem too engaged during the process, but that's not uncommon. Baby is born and is fine. Sister sends dad to get some stuff. Note here, all people involved are Hispanic and only speak Spanish. My specific medical Spanish is pretty decent and I can get you through an epidural or delivery. Most things that come up pretty well, but I'm not fluent. So as soon as the dad leaves the sister, it's like, "I have a question for you," and then proceeds to say something I can't understand at all. I try to clarify, but I'm just not getting it. I offer to go get the translator. She's like, "No, I don't want it to be official." She whips out her phone and through Google Translate asks, "How can we get a paternity test in the hospital?" I then have to explain that we really don't do that, but you can get one at CVS. They tell me that the baby doesn't look like the other child of this mom and this guy and that it might be someone else's, but they want to check before telling him. So I just apologize and tell them how they can get a DNA test at CVS, and they're like $50. This isn't the first time I've been asked about paternity testing. I just had no idea how you say it in Spanish. Story 15. Not a doctor, but a distant cousin of mine definitely has children that don't belong to the father. My cousin was adopted as an infant. She struggled with some developmental issues and has a low IQ compared to most, but can still live on her own with little to no issues. She, a white woman, married a Latino guy, really dark brown skin several years ago, and they had a son together who has dark hair. dark skin and dark eyes. He's easily identified as their son. The real trouble happens years later. Her husband, who we'll call Javier, has some IQ issues of his own. Just a little slow when it comes to tasks and reasoning. Anyway, Javier is in the military and gets deployed internationally for about 6 months. When he comes home, his wife is 4 months pregnant. You do the math. He still believes the baby is his own, even after it's born with pale skin and blonde hair and blue eyes. If that wasn't bad enough, it happens again, 2 years later with another baby. Same blonde hair and blue eyes. Everyone knows she slept with a different man. It was actually her high school boyfriend, but Javier still thinks the children are his. Yeah, it's kind of sad, but at this point, there's not much you can do. He's raised the kids as his own. W dad, L mom, for sure. Story 16. If you guys are enjoying this thread, you should watch Lauren Lake's Paternity Court on TV. My favorite case was the one where the female spent almost the entire 25 minutes going over all this proof that the kid was his, using facial similarities, swearing up and down, and even bringing in witness to test that she was of good character and wouldn't cheat. Even straight insulting the guy, saying how crappy it is, he denies his child and won't grow up, etc. Through all of this, the guy just stood there quietly, not saying a word, not defending himself, nothing. Finally, the judge asks if he has anything to say or would like to plead his case. He motions to the only thing on the desk, a manila folder. Plaintiff takes it to the judge. She opens it, reads for a minute, then dismisses the case in the favor of the guy. Turns out he had been deployed overseas in Afghanistan during the year before and during the entire pregnancy and birth. He came home after 4 years and was introduced to his 2-year-old child. Story 17. Neither a doctor nor nurse, but a good friend of mine was out of the country in an emergency with his work, and I ended up bringing his wife to the ER. My friend and I are, even still, best friends, and all of us went to high school together, and I have no idea his wife was unfaithful. However, I was in the delivery room as she didn't want to be without anyone there. Baby came out. Straight up Asian. I knew. The OB knew. I just walked out of the room then. All I could hear, her wailing, saying her marriage is over, and the nurses quickly picked up on why she was crying. I called him and told him the news. He explained to his work that a true emergency was at home, so they chartered him a flight home. Saudi Aramco high-class action. And he filed divorce right then and there. During the divorce, out of their 3 kids, 0 were my friends. It didn't just mess my friend up, it messed the kid up as well because they knew him as daddy. The court tried to make my friend pay support for those kids who weren't his because they became accustomed to it, and the dad abandonment was borderline criminal. He had 0 biological attachment. Family courts are so biased against men. My friend spent a fortune fighting it out of principle and eventually won. It emotionally ruined him, and now he doesn't trust women. He won't go on dates or anything because of it. I can't say I blame him, but that is beyond messed up. Story 18. My coworker's aunt just found out her dad wasn't actually her dad. So she was really big into genealogy and had mapped out her family tree as far as she could go. She took one of those ancestry DNA tests about 2 months ago, and her father's side didn't line up with what she was expecting. In fact, she didn't recognize a single name that she was matched with paternally. She casually asked her dad if he knew any of the names, and he recognized the surname of the maintenance man at the apartment complex where he and his wife, aunt's mom, lived shortly after they had gone married. Claimed he was a lousy repairman who always flirted with his wife, etc. Aunt's mom had passed away a few years ago, so she decided to not tell her dad the news. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 19. Not obligatory, not a nurse or doctor. My brother told me the story about a man he used to work with. Brother's work friend is from an Eastern European country and came to the US many moons ago and started his family here. One of his sons meets a nice girl. They plan to get married, but life happens and then more life ends up coming out of them. Whole big family is excited about the new baby. The father-to-be is absolutely ecstatic. They have a small ceremony before the baby is born, yada yada. Delivery time comes, and out pops this little boy who is about 50 shades darker than either parent, and the new dad absolutely loses his crap. In his heartbroken rage, he accuses his new bride of cheating on him, disowns that child, and rages right out of the delivery room, leaving the new mom all alone with her mound of shame. This guy returns to his family and continues his hate-filled rampage and exclaims to his family that his of a wife had cheated on him because the baby looked nothing like him in skin tone. The family's shocked. Never would have believed the sweet young thing would do that to their son. Absolute shame and misery all around. Well, sitting in a dark little corner of the room, little tiny grandma chirps up and has a story to tell. Apparently, back in her glory days, during some war or another, she had a great summer with a French soldier. A black French soldier. She got knocked up and he got sent home, and back then you kept the baby and hoped your family didn't end you before you could abandon it somewhere. She ended up meeting her husband shortly after getting knocked up, and things just progressed as if it were his child, and wouldn't you know, the little thing popped out white as snow, and she breathed a sigh of relief because this was going to be the easiest lie to keep, ever. So this poor schmuck has been carrying around the super melanin gene his whole life and knocked up his wife, and it decided to all come out on a sweet little boy, who he now has to go crawling back and reclaim. Thankfully, the whole family went with him to the hospital. Old grandma had a picture of her old fella as proof, and husband and wife were reunited. Wow. That is the biggest... sorry about that. What I was just saying is that was the biggest plot twist out of all these stories. Story 20. I was sample typing a newborn once. Mom was an O positive, baby was AB positive, which is more or less not possible. I immediately panicked because, Jesus God, they mixed up the babies. Someone has the wrong baby. We're gonna get sued. They're gonna have to genetic test the entire nursery. What if they subpoena me for being the idiot who discovered the problem? I don't have insurance. What if they sue me? After repeating the test 3 times, I called the floor and told them that they'd either drawn the wrong baby samples or they'd switch babies because mom couldn't be the baby's mother. Well, no, it was a donor egg. 3 draw matched fine. Everyone was where they were supposed to be. Oh God, my heart though. Story 21. Not a doctor or nurse, but my dad was accused of being the father to a child that wasn't his. So basically, my dad was accused by a woman he slept with. My dad wasn't exactly the most faithful man, that the child was his, even though the child was mixed. The woman was white, and so was my dad. The case actually went to the Trisha show, like the Jeremy Kyle show, but older. The test results came out, and shockingly enough, he wasn't the father. One moment from the show, Trish asked my dad, "Do you have any other kids?" And he just smirked. I never really found out how many women he got pregnant at the time, and it's likely I went to school with my brothers and sisters, but neither of us knew we had the same dad. I never really found out what happened to the woman or to the baby either, but I truly do hope that the baby grew up healthy and happy. And I hope the mother found peace with herself. Story 22. Not a medical professional, but I know of a related court case that made it to the state's highest court. Black guy and white woman are married. She's a former street worker, and at some point they separate. He moves out of state, she moves out of state, and she goes back to working. Guy gets a phone call around 9 months later from a friend or relative of his ex saying that his ex is pregnant and ready to give birth any day now. Guy drives across the country so he could be there for the delivery. Baby comes out and is white. Has blue eyes and red hair. Mom says it must be a Trix baby. Seeing as the guy's black, he understandably pieces out. Later on, the mom's parental rights are terminated. As you can imagine from the work, she was not a fit mother, and the state went about trying to find the dad to be notified or before the kid can be adopted. Since the dude was still her husband at the time the child was born, legally he was the presumptive father. The state does genetic testing, and twist, turns out he is the father. For an extra kick in the pants, the state ends up terminating his parental rights for abandonment. Not a happy ending. Story 23. I worked labor and delivery. Had a very young mother come in, accompanied by parents. She was just 12 to 13, and parents looked stuffy and kept telling her should have had a termination. She was too young, etc. Her mother was silent the whole time, but leaked tears for her constantly. While she labored, I received a call from a very young boy who said he was her boyfriend. His trembling voice explained that her father wouldn't come to the hospital. I explained that I couldn't give out information, but he could talk to her afterward. I went in, told her he had called, and she showed me a picture of him. He had white, straight, red hair, pimply and tiny. The runt of the litter. About an hour later, her physical education teacher stopped by to check on her, which I thought was odd. Wouldn't get many teachers checking on students. He was opposite of the boyfriend as he could get. Tall, very muscular, beautiful smile, and rich, chocolate brown skin. The girl's father accompanied her to the delivery room. Odd, but okay. The more she pushed, the louder she cried. In between, she kept saying, "Sorry, Daddy." Finally, out slid a very beautiful chocolate brown baby boy. I thought her father was going to pass the crap out on my delivery room floor. I did my usual, "It's a boy," and said nothing else. I handed him off to a nursery nurse and got Dad a chair. The new mom said, "I'm sorry, Daddy," over and over again. Her mom, now frowned up, came to see the baby, took one look, started asking God for forgiveness, and left. I sent her dad home a short bit later, admonishing him to react at home, not here. I set up a time for a counselor to meet with him before I left. After talking to the new mom, she admitted her gym teacher had been giving her special treatment. I explained intimacy to her, and she said she'd only kissed the BFF, but had stayed after school to be with her gym teacher. I'm state mandated to report child mistreatment, so I did. 2 weeks later, with her world shattered, her baby was given up for adoption. I wish her the best. Of note, this was 1989. Story 24. Obligatory not me, but my great-grandmother. Great-granny grew up and lived in a very bad or poor area of a city near a military base around World War I and World War II. In order to make ends meet, she became a street worker. Our understanding is that she was very good at her job and therefore very popular with all the military men around. She did not care what you looked like or your skin color as long as you paid. Her first husband finally figured out that she was the infamous town worker when her first kid came out very obviously mixed. They got divorced and she found a second husband that didn't mind it at first. One white child and 2 mixed babies later, they divorced. Repeat with 2 out of 11 known living kids being 100% white and a total of 5 husbands, as well as several boyfriends and fiancés walking out on her. Stories are that the hospital staff used to make bets on how soon she'd be back and what mix. Black, Native American, Asian, Hispanic, etc. the kid would be at that time. Story 25. This is off topic, but it reminded me of something. Some of you might know who Steve Nash is. For those of you who don't, he was a former NBA superstar basketball player. Well, during his prime, his wife got pregnant, and the media liked to ask Steve questions about it sometimes, so it was known his wife was pregnant. Well, literally the day after his wife gave birth to their son, Steve filed for a divorce. It was largely swept under the rug, and nobody ever talked about it again. Come to find out, one of his black teammates was sleeping with his wife, and it was his kid. That player ended up getting traded to a different team about a month later because I'm assuming Steve didn't want him to be on the team. This is still widely unknown to the public because everyone involved did a really good job of hiding it. Story 26. I was hoping someone in this thread would have a similar story, or be able to answer this, but I haven't come across it. Long story short, I do marketing for a housing company, and this entails getting testimonials from residents at our properties. This one couple I talked to were probably in their 40s and told us that their kids were finally out of the house, so they decided to downsize. After the formal part of the interview was over, the couple was still talking to us and said something like, "Yeah, we couldn't wait to get on with this part of life, but then we accidentally had a third kid. Despite what they say, those dang vasectomies don't work, because I still knocked her up." The wife's eyes were wide and she was looking at us with a panicked expression on her face. I know my own expression had changed from a smile to pure confusion, but I honestly couldn't help it. Still not sure if they were telling us the truth or if that the guy had actually been raising someone else's kid for 18 years. Story 27. I was doing epidurals in residency. This Caucasian couple was from a more rural part of the country and they don't look or sound particularly educated. Anyhow, wife is particularly antsy, asking when she can go home, even though the baby isn't out yet. Husband looks bored and uninterested, like he's been there a whole bunch of times. I usually don't stay in the rooms during delivery, but this one I just happened to be nearby to give more in the epidural because of a tear immediately after delivery. Anyhow, when I get to the room, the wife is holding her eyes shut and doesn't want to see the baby. I look at the baby and he's obviously black. Now the husband is paying attention and he sees what I do. He keeps repeating, "When that baby gonna pink up?" Louder and louder. The OB tries to diffuse things by reminding everyone that this moment is critical and suggests the baby should be taken to the resuscitation area in the NICU and that the father should step out. He called the social worker and security and I was called elsewhere, so I don't know what happened afterwards, so I can't imagine it was good. Story 28. No, I'm not in the medical field, just married into an odd family. About 15 years ago, my significant other's youngest brother got really sick. Was in and out of hospitals and seeing a bunch of doctors. I was admitted yet again, and my father-in-law called and asked all the siblings to come, just in case. We were the last to arrive. We got there, and everyone was completely silent, obviously having been crying. Both thought, "Oh crap, he passed away." My significant other started to tear up, and his dad came striding towards us, tears still running down his face, and said, "Well, let's step outside. There's something I have to tell you." Turns out father-in-law wasn't really the youngest brother's dad, nor was he the dad to 3 other of my significant other's siblings. The hospital wanted to run some tests on father-in-law and stepmother-in-law to rule out something. I don't remember what, and they had to come clean. The siblings were 25, 26, 27, and 28, so kind of messed them up for a bit. Story 29. My horrible ex-coworker had this happen to her. She was a horrible person for many, many reasons, but one of them was that she cheated on her husband with his best friend. Coworker and her husband both had extremely blonde hair and light blue eyes. The best friend had thick black hair, dark brown eyes. Everyone knew it was a possibility, and realized as soon as the baby was born. Apparently, it was a very awkward day. The coworker and husband are still together 16 to 17 years later, although their relationship is pretty much loveless. They had another baby, it was his. Coworker does not allow the biological dad to see the kid, which I think is a crap move. Husband obviously treats the kid that is his better than the one that isn't. A coworker complained about this constantly when I worked with her, but did nothing about it. It's a really, really crappy situation. The baby is now a teenager and absolutely despises her stepdad and now has some behavioral problems. Story 30. Not the exact story you're looking for, but I'm a med-surg nurse. I had an older male patient who was in for anemia with critically low hemoglobin levels, receiving a few units of samples. I've been taking care of him in the last couple of days, and his daughter was visiting at the time with the patient's wife and him. We had to do our 2-nurse identification process for the samples, where we go over the name, ID numbers, and sample type for confirmation before hanging it on the patient. When we were going through it, the daughter stopped us and asked us what type we just said. I didn't really understand why at the time, but I told her again, and she got really concerned we may be hanging the wrong samples. She said that couldn't be right because she was an anatomy professor and there was no way the cross-match could be right. Because she was AB and she knew her mom had type A, so her dad couldn't possibly be A either. I didn't think much of it, and we went back to the doctor to ask him for another cross-match, and he was like, "Oh yeah, she might not be his daughter then." We ordered another cross-match, and sure enough, it came back as an A type. She just sat in the corner really quiet the rest of the day with a really sad look on her face. Her mom and dad didn't really get what was going on, but I know she had some idea. Story 31. Kinda happened to my mom. My biological father is Greek with very pale skin, and my mom is a white Western European mutt. When I was born, I had very dark skin and a full head of thick black hair. They didn't seem concerned, but his mother freaked out, called my mother and grandmother not so nice names, and left. My father ended up splitting us when I was about 3 weeks old with no explanation. A couple months later, my skin lightened. All of my black hair fell, and it turns out he was the father. We've never tried to reach back out to his family because in that first year of my life, they went through a lot of drama, including arrests, rehab stays, drive-by, an affair followed by divorce, another baby mama my mother didn't know about. The list goes on. My father and I tried to form a relationship when I was in high school. It went okay at first, and then he got weird very quickly. He insisted to call him dad, insisted on regular visitation, routinely showed up at my friends' and boyfriends' houses causing a scene, insisted to get family pictures with his new lady and his 5 other kids. None of us have the same mother, and this is not including the baby he had and ditched before he got together with my mom. I regret ever trying at all. He and his family were and are still trashy hot messes, and I'm glad my family decided to keep me away from them. Cherry on top, he was working for my now husband's parents when my husband and I first met. Once his parents found out who he was and what had happened, they fired him so I would never have to run into him at their business. He had it coming anyway, so they were glad to finally stop making excuses for him and let him go. Story 32. This happened to my brother. He broke up with his super crazy girlfriend, and a couple months later, she started calling him, telling him she was pregnant. He was very skeptical that the baby was his. We all were, because after they broke up, she basically slept with everyone who would. So we waited for months so she could have the baby and my brother could get the paternity test. He was in the delivery room, and I was waiting right outside to support him. So after the baby gets cleaned up from delivery, he comes walking out with this weird look in his face and shows me the baby who looks more like his clone than his son. My brother passed away when his son was 10, and every time I see my nephew, it's a little shocking, because I swear I'm looking at my bro. It makes me miss him a little less, though, and my nephew is more like a son to me. Turns out you are the father. Story 33. My cousin was an obstetrics nurse in a Central European country. 2 women were in the maternity ward. Sadly, one lady had delivered a still baby and was terribly upset. She told my cousin she and her husband had been trying for a baby for many years without success. She had difficulty conceiving and they had a couple of miscarriages. She and her husband were overjoyed to carry a baby to term. The husband was not present in the ward that day, but the lady said he would be devastated to find out there was no baby. The other lady delivered a healthy baby, but was also upset. They were poor and already had 4 children at home. Their finances were stretched. She did not want to look after yet another baby. Her husband was very upset she was pregnant again. Not that he was blameless, but that's a different story. He was at work and was not at the hospital that day. My cousin talked to the other nurses. No paperwork had been completed. So the staff put both women in the same room with the one healthy baby and suggested they may want to talk. 40 minutes later, the lady without a child was holding the healthy baby. Both women looked happy and relieved. Few words were spoken, but the paperwork was written up by the staff to reverse the records of the 2 births. The lady who suffered a stillbirth went home with the baby she wanted, and the other lady returned, relieved, to her home and the 4 other kids. They were of the same ethnic background and had similar features, so the swap probably went undetected. I don't know about the ethics and legality of all that, but it was human. I will say that. Story 34. Last time this question was asked, I related the story of a guy, white, who was in the same delivery room as me and whose girlfriend, also white, gave birth to a boy who was black. She started to stutter something about being sorry and it was only a one-night thing, only for him to say, "What? It's a boy. Now we can get a Scalix trick set." Yeah, I thought this was so obviously a joke that I didn't bother clarifying it was made up. It's actually ripped off a spoof ad I saw years ago. But people took it literally and thought it was real. Made me feel bad, and I've never told a fake story and read it again. Not even for a Tree Fitty. Story 35. I might be the first medical professional to post on this thread. God damn. So I'm an NICU nurse that was floating to the nursery. A baby was born with a genetic abnormality but was otherwise doing fine. Pediatrician was in the parents' room discussing with him the follow-up type stuff for the baby. Appointments with a geneticist, an orthopedic surgeon, etc. At some point in the conversation, the mother asked what the baby's type was, to which the pediatrician responded, A positive. The father of the baby insisted that was impossible, as he and his wife, this was their third baby, were both O negative. The pediatrician got totally flustered and came back to the nursery to verify the lab results. Baby really was A positive. We even went so far as to redraw the baby samples and retest it. Nope, A positive. There is absolutely no chance that the baby belonged to that man. The husband left the hospital soon after and didn't show up again until it was time to pick up the mom and baby to bring them home. The mom spent the rest of the hospital stay lying alone, in the dark, mostly hiding under the covers. Story 36. Healthcare worker here. A lady came in to deliver that mild schizophrenia, but stopped her meds for the pregnancy and was doing well with therapy. Had the possibility of 3 different men being the father of her son. One who accompanied her but had no interaction with the baby and wanted a paternity test. The mother did really well with bonding and caring for the baby, but when she went home, she ended up mentally declining and off to a mental hospital. 2 days after he left, the baby was admitted for dehydration and weight loss. After he was all better, the man who was present for his delivery didn't want to take him, as he had little knowledge of newborn care. The little baby was put into foster care. A week later, the newborn was in intensive care with permanent brain damage related to being dropped by the foster parents. My heart ached so bad for this family and the situation. So not exactly an it's not my baby situation, but it's pretty close. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.